Okay, let's dive in. Today we're tackling something truly vast, an epic sweep through the history of China.
Thousands of years. It's quite a scope.
Exactly. From the, legendary dynasties right up to the modern era. And this deep dive, it's built specifically from the sources you shared with us, articles, research, your notes. So our mission, basically, is to cut through this, immense amount of information, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising facts, and help you get a real handle on this huge story.
It's a massive undertaking, history on this scale.
It is, absolutely packed with events, incredible figures, but we'll take a focused, hopefully engaging journey through it.
And really, understanding these historical foundations, it's just so crucial for grasping China today, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You see these patterns established way back, millennia ago.
Yeah.
And they're still shaping things now, politics, culture.
It's fascinating tracing those threads.
Definitely. How the ancient flows into the modern.
Okay, let's start right at the legendary beginnings. We hear about Yu, the engineer.
Yes, you.
The sources say after years of just devastating floods, he finally gets the rivers under control.
A huge feat, apparently. So impressive it earned him the ruler role.
And tradition holds that's the start of the Xia dynasty.
Right. And here, right at the supposed start, we see this critical shift.
Okay.
Yu was chosen for merit, right? He solved this huge problem. But then, when it's time for his successor, the sources say the provincial lords, they didn't want another merit choice. They pushed for his son, Qi.
So Qi becomes the first ruler just based on bloodline, hereditary rule?
Exactly. Sets the pattern for literally thousands of years of Chinese leadership.
It's pretty striking how early that pattern emerges.
It really is. And the Xia, like many dynasties after, supposedly ends with a cruel ruler.
Ji,
right. Described as just focused on pleasure, debauchery.
Yeah, and his reign brings up this foundational concept, the mandate of heaven.
The mandate of heaven, this idea that heaven gives power to a just ruler, but takes it away from a wicked one.
Precisely. Ji was seen as having lost that favor, big time. So he gets overthrown.
By a group with new bronze weapons, actually, which signals China entering the Bronze Age.
And that brings us to the Shang dynasty.
Yes, the Shang.
And this is where things get really concrete for historians, because the Shang give us written history.
The oracle bones. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah.
These inscriptions on bone and shell, they're not just symbols. They give remarkable detail. Royal activities, daily life, everything.
The sources highlight just how significant this is, over 3,000 documented characters.
From the Shang era alone. And many are recognizably related to modern Chinese characters. Think about that continuity over 3,600 years.
It's just astounding, a written tradition stretching back almost 4 millennia.
Truly unique.
So what else do the sources tell us about Shang society?
Well, they were quite mobile. They used things like seashells, brought back from travels, as currency. Definitely a feudal system. Power and wealth with the nobility, peasants had it rough, not much autonomy. Strong military kept things in check.
And the religious practices sound pretty intense.
Oh, they were deeply religious. High priests had a lot of power. Practices included human sacrifice, sometimes large numbers, actually, for good weather, good fortune, stuff like that.
Wow.
And there are these unsettling accounts of burying slaves alive with their masters for service in the afterlife.
Grim. That's a really grim picture. But militarily, they were advanced for the time.
Very. Mastered bronze, casting for weapons, used chariots effectively. But it was a restless time, constant battles with neighbors, internal conflicts.
Yeah.
They had moved their capital 5 times.
5 times.
Yeah. But their metalwork kept them in power for around 600 years?
And their end sounds a bit like the Shia's end, doesn't it? The last Shang emperor, Dixon.
Also depicted as falling into debauchery, cruelty. The sources mention truly horrific things, like having his own uncle's heart cut out.
Just awful. Losing the mandate of heaven again.
Exactly the narrative. So around 1046 BCE, the Zhou, who'd been vassals of the Shang, rise up. They defeat them at the Battle of Muya.
And that's the start of the Zhou dynasty, which your sources note is China's longest lasting. An incredible 789 years.
That longevity is just remarkable, isn't it?
It really is.
And their victory at Muya, it was helped by support from the suffering Shang population. Even Shang soldiers defected.
Which really cemented that mandate of heaven idea.
Absolutely. It became this central principle of legitimacy, not just might, but popular support, moral rightness.
So nearly 8 centuries.
Yeah.
What kind of advancements did the zoo bring?
Well, they were huge agricultural innovators, developed large-scale irrigation, boosting production massively,
Okay.
built extensive canal networks for transport, trade, horseback riding became standard, and silk, that famous Chinese export, starts reaching Europe during the zoo.
And they were way ahead in metalworking, centuries ahead.
Totally. This is really key. They mastered iron casting.
Yeah.
Using these heat-resistant clay furnaces, molds, they could mass-produce iron tools, weapons. Europe, the Middle East wouldn't catch up for hundreds of years. It was a huge technological leap.
Massive advantage, militarily and economically.
Definitely propelled them forward.
So a long-lasting dynasty, major innovations, but it wasn't smooth sailing for 800 years, right?
Oh, far from it. The zoo is split into two periods. Western Zoo initially had a more, functional feudal system.
Okay.
But the Eastern Zoo period, starting around 771 BCE, that saw increasing fragmentation. The feudal lords got powerful, started revolting, forced the capital to move east to Luoyang.
So the central king became more symbolic.
Pretty much. Real power was with these increasingly independent vassal states.
So central power weakens. But paradoxically, this time of fragmentation, the Eastern Zoo, it also sees this explosion of thought, the 100 years of thought.
Exactly. That political chaos kind of created fertile ground for philosophy. Three major schools emerged that would just profoundly shape Chinese history.
Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism.
The big three.
Let's break those down, starting with maybe the most enduring. Confucianism. Tell us about Confucius, Kong-Q.
Confucius himself, born poor but deeply educated in the classics, rituals, held some minor government jobs, eventually became Minister of Criminal Matters in the Lucas, his home state.
And his core philosophy, what was he driving at?
It really starts with belief in the basic goodness of people. Confucius wanted to restore social order, moral harmony. How now? Through virtuous conduct, proper rituals, these hierarchical relationships built on respect.
Right, ruler-subject, father-son.
Exactly. Husband, wife, elder, younger, friend. He was reacting directly against the brutality he saw, emphasizing moral cultivation as the path to good government.
A clear contrast to the cruelty we've heard about. What about legalism, then?
Legalism is starkly different. It basically says people are fundamentally selfish, driven by self-interest.
Okay.
So social order needs strict laws, harsh punishments, centralized control enforced through fear. You can't rely on individual goodness.
And Taoism takes another path entirely.
Yeah, Taoism, often linked with figures like Laozi, emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao, the natural way of the universe. Its philosophy often centers on wu wei, or inaction, not doing nothing, but acting in line with the natural flow, minimizing interference, striving for simplicity.
And your sources are clear. These weren't just ivory tower debates back then.
Not at all. These three philosophies got deeply woven into Chinese culture, governance, influencing everything from statecraft to daily life for millennia. And they're still incredibly relevant today.
It is fascinating how a society draws from such different ideas, moral order, pragmatic control, natural harmony.
Right. It raises that question. How do these seemingly contradictory ideas keep informing governance and life in China across so much time?
So, the Eastern Zoo, intellectual flowering but also political breakdown, the independent states become the warring states.
That's right. The former dukes now call themselves kings. 7 major states locked in this brutal fight for ultimate control.
And this era of intense conflict gives us Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
Absolutely. A product of its time. Warfare was transforming, battles got bigger, more strategic, lots of deception, huge armies.
Conscription starting really young, like 15.
Yeah, and campaigns could drag on for months, even years. Just devastating for everyone involved.
So which state started to pull ahead in all this?
The Qin state. They were in the west, a rugged, dangerous area, so they needed a strong military early on. They were quick adopters of iron weapons, swords, the powerful crossbow. And their leader, Ying Zeng. Ambitious, ruthless.
He becomes Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor.
The very one.
And they started conquering the other states.
They did. Han was weakest, fell pretty quickly. Next big target, Zhao. Strong state, but they'd been badly weakened decades earlier at the Battle of Changping. Horrific Qin victory there.
Hundreds of thousands killed, reportedly buried alive.
The numbers are debated, but yeah, immense casualty. Weakened Zhao significantly.
But the sources mention Zhao still had a really good general, Li Mu.
Li Mu, yes. He was formidable. A skilled tactician, initially held the Qin back. Ying Zeng knew defeating him militarily wouldn't be easy.
So he found another way. Politics.
Exactly. Here's where it gets interesting, a detail from the sources. Ying Zeng didn't beat Li Mu on the battlefield. He used spies, Bribes.
In the Zhao court.
Yep. So distrust between King Yumu and Li Mu
Banashee.
played on internal politics.
And it actually worked.
Astonishingly, yes. King Yumu, maybe paranoid, definitely manipulated, became convinced Li Mu was disloyal, maybe plotting treason.
Despite his record.
Despite his loyal service, the king ordered him dismissed, then executed.
Wow.
With Li Mu gone, Zhao's defense just crumbled. Qin conquered them swiftly.
The best general taken down by intrigue, not battle. That says a lot about power.
It really does.
Oh.
Shows how sophisticated the struggle had become. After Zhao, Yingzheng finished his conquests, unified all 7 states under his rule in 221 BCE. End of the Warring States, start of the Qin dynasty.
The Qin dynasty. Incredibly short-lived, right? Only about 15 years.
Roughly, yeah. But its impact was absolutely massive, foundational.
The name China comes from Qin, the sources suggest.
I believe so. And Qin Shi Huang policies, while brutal, they fundamentally reshaped the state. Intense centralization.
A real contrast to the Zhou feudalism.
Totally different. He swept away the old feudal lords, implemented a uniform system everywhere,
How'd he do that?
registered every citizen, directed all taxes to the central state, divided land into provinces run by appointed officials loyal to him, not hereditary lords, standardized currencies, weights, measures, even the written script across the whole empire.
Created a kind of cultural and administrative unity.
Exactly. Forcefully imposed, sure, but it laid the groundwork for future unified dynasties.
Yeah.
China became one empire, one emperor.
But unification came with this notorious cruelty.
Deeply rooted in legalist ideas, Qin Shi Huang believed strict laws, harsh, terrifying punishments were the only way to maintain order. Sources describe just ghastly penalties for even minor things. Collective punishment was common to whole families. Villages held responsible.
Life for peasants must have been incredibly hard.
Grueling. Forced labor on top of farming, silk weaving. Women had very limited roles in this patriarchal setup. The sources are clear. Common people hated the emperor's cruelty, the crushing demands.
And adding to those demands, the threat from nomadic tribes up north.
Chang knew.
Yeah, precursors to the Huns, constant raids, highlighted the need for stronger borders, which leads to one of the Qin's most infamous projects.
The Great Wall.
Well, the beginnings of it, sort of. Parts of walls existed already from other states. Qin Shi Huang's project was about strengthening these sections into a longer system.
Using forced peasant labor, terrible conditions.
Exactly. Built with local materials. More like a massive border fortification system then. But it started that tradition of wall building.
Speaking of grand projects, Qin Shi Huang also got obsessed with immortality later on.
Fascinating, almost tragic detail, yeah. As he got older, fear of death consumed him. Sent alchemists, explorers like Xu Fu, on these quests.
Looking for mythical islands, elixirs of life? Right, across the seas. And it seems Xu Fu might have played him a bit.
How so?
Well, Xu Fu reportedly asked for 3,000 virgin boys and girls, a whole fleet for his first trip, came back empty-handed, blamed a giant sea monster.
A sea monster. Seriously.
Claimed he needed archers for the next attempt. And Qin Shi Huang, desperate, paranoid, actually agreed. Xu Fu sailed off with everyone, never seen again.
Probably sailed to Japan and stayed there.
That's a leading theory, yeah. Just decided not to come back.
Meanwhile, the emperor's trying potions from his own alchemists.
The cruel irony, right? His search for eternal life probably killed him faster. Those potions had high levels of mercury.
This was also when he was burning books, burying scholars alive.
Yes, trying to stamp out any dissent, particularly from Confucian scholars. He died at 49.
But not before commissioning that incredible tomb complex.
The Terracotta Army. An underground city, basically. Thousands of unique clay warriors discovered by farmers in 74.
Often called the eighth wonder of the world.
And rightly so. The detail is amazing. Each warrior distinct, equipped with real bronze weapons, mass-produced just for the afterlife. Shows incredible organization, manufacturing power.
And the scale, 700,000 laborers. Yet so little documentation about its construction.
Adds to the mystery, doesn't it? A massive state secret almost.
After his death, though, the dynasty just collapses. Power struggle.
Big time. His chief eunuch, Zhao Gao, and the Chancellor Li Si conspired. Kept his death secret initially. Forged a document, supposedly from the emperor, ordering the eldest son, Fuzi the rightful heir, and a loyal general to commit suicide.
And they did it.
Tragically, yes. They then put a much less capable younger son, Qin Ersi, on the throne.
But the conspirators turned on each other.
Pretty quickly, Qin Ersi was easily manipulated, became paranoid. Turned on Li Si first.
Accused him of treason.
Yep. Sentenced him to the horrific lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. Executed his whole family, too.
Just brutal.
This internal chaos, plus massive peasant revolts fueled by years of Qin cruelty,
Yep.
the dynasty just imploded.
And out of those revolts, a new dynasty, founded by a peasant, Liu Bang.
Who becomes Emperor Gaozu. After some intense fighting with rivals like the Battle of Gaixia, huge casualties there, Liu Bang wins out, establishes the Han dynasty.
Initial capital Chang, so this is the Western Han period.
Right.
And the Han turned out to be incredibly successful, long-lasting.
The legacy is just immense. Over 90% of China's population today identify as ethnically Han. The Han state was probably the world's most populous then, a contemporary power to Rome.
And Gaozu, coming from a peasant background, seems to have consciously reversed a lot of the hated kin policies.
Huge contrast, yeah. Key to their success. He slashed taxes, cut forced labor, freed slaves. Crucially, he ditched legalism, brought back Confucianism as the guiding philosophy, emphasized morality, social harmony, set up an imperial academy for Confucian classics.
And created the civil service system based on merit, not birth.
A truly landmark reform, recruiting officials based on education, ability, often through exams, not just who you knew or were related to.
And that system lasted for almost 2,000 years.
Pretty much. Shaped Chinese government right into the 20th century, designed to get capable administrators regardless of background.
Domestically successful, but the threat from the Xiongnu up north didn't go away.
Nope, still a constant problem. After some military setbacks, Gaozu adopted this policy called Hikin, peace through kinship.
Which meant?
Basically, paying them off. Annual tribute silk, wine, often sending princesses as brides to the Xiongnu leaders, hoping to buy stability.
After Gaozu died, things got messy internally. His consort, Empress Liu, held the real power.
Yeah, her son, Emperor Hui, was nominally in charge, but Empress Liu was ruthless. Consolidated power, murdered rivals. Your sources include this particularly horrifying account from the historian Sima Qian about Lady Qiti.
Gaozu's favorite mistress. The description of her mutilation is, it's disturbing.
Sima Qian writes, Empress Liu had her hands and feet cut off, eyes gouged out, ears burned, made mute with a potion, then threw her in a privy. Called her a human swine.
Just unimaginable cruelty.
Emperor He reportedly saw her, was so horrified and traumatized, he basically gave up ruling, died young. Highlights the brutality within the court.
Okay, moving forward a bit. Emperor Wu's reign. Hugely significant for looking outwards.
Emperor Wu, the martial emperor, initially went back to fighting the Xiongnu. But to find allies, he sent envoys west. Zhang Hin is the famous one.
He didn't find the allies he wanted.
Not really, but he traveled deep into Central Asia. Brought back detailed knowledge of lands way out West India, the Middle East, sophisticated civilizations.
And that knowledge sparked the Silk Road.
Exactly. Ignited interest in trade. Led to this vital network of routes stretching all the way from China to the Mediterranean. Named later, of course, for China silk.
So it wasn't just goods moving back and forth.
Oh, unprecedented cultural exchange. Ideas, technologies, religions flowing across Eurasia. It's how Buddhism first entered China, though it took centuries to really take root.
The Han also expanded territorially during this time, southward.
Yep, brought areas like northern Vietnam, parts of Myanmar under their influence.
So expansion, trade routes, cultural connections. Sounds like a golden age. But it came at a cost.
Always does, doesn't it? Imperial expansion is expensive. Wars drained the treasury, cost hundreds of thousands of soldiers' lives, meant heavy taxes on peasants.
Creating instability again.
Led to widespread discontent, Set the stage for the Han's eventual decline.
And that decline leads to another period of fragmentation, starting with the short-lived Jin dynasty under Wang Mang.
Wang Mei, yeah. A high official who basically usurped the throne when the Han were weak, established the Jin dynasty, lasted only from 9 to 23 A.D.
Known for radical land reforms, almost socialist.
Tried to address peasant poverty by redistributing land from the rich, but it was badly managed, caused chaos. That, plus natural disasters, the Qin collapsed quickly.
But the Han came back.
They did. A Han relative, Liu Zhu, became Emperor Guangwu, reestablished the dynasty, starting the Eastern Han period. Capital moved to Luoyang, sometimes seen as another Han Golden Age.
What marked this second Han period?
Prosperity returned, education system thrived, military stayed strong, good crossbows, iron weapons. Still promoting Confucianism heavily for selecting officials.
But the power dynamic shifted inside the government.
Yeah, over time, the civil service class got more and more powerful, sometimes overshadowing the emperor. Many later Eastern Han emperors were young or ineffective, more interested in palace life. led to bad policies, high taxes, famine.
Fueling unrest among the people.
Exactly.
Huh.
Which found expression in the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Massive uprising.
Led by Zhang Zhao, using Taoist ideas.
Right. Mobilized millions, claiming the Han had lost the mandate of heaven again.
They didn't overthrow the Han directly, but fatally weakened them.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The central government couldn't handle it, so they gave huge power to regional military leaders, nobles, to raise their own armies. Yeah. Yellow Turbans were eventually beaten, but those regional strongmen, they weren't giving up their power, led straight into warlordism after the last Han emperor was pushed aside.
Plunging China into the turbulent Three Kingdoms period.
Wei Wu Shuhan. Intense civil war, immortalized in literature, followed by a brief, shaky reunification under the Jin dynasty.
Emperor Wu of Jin, the one with the goat cart.
Infamously, yes. Used a goat-drawn cart to randomly choose which concubine's palace to visit each night. Symbolizes the indulgence, the instability underneath.
Definitely memorable.
The Jin dynasty fragmented again pretty quickly, split into northern and southern dynasties, internal wars, nomadic groups moving in, lots of chaos, especially in the north.
This long period of division eventually ends with another unifier, the Sui.
The Sui dynasty, short, 581 to 618 AD, but really important, managed to reunify China after centuries, reinstated ethnic Han rules, started cultural assimilation, fostered both Buddhism and Confucianism.
But their end is often seen as a cautionary tale. Overreach.
Yang Guang, yeah.
Here.
His reign was pretty disastrous. Obsessed with huge construction projects, rebuilding parts of the Great Wall, extending the Grand Canal, drove peasants to death with forced labor.
And failed military campaigns.
Even worse, costly invasions of Goguryeo in modern Korea. Catastrophic losses. Some sources say 90% casualty rates in some campaigns.
Misusing resources, losing wars. Recipe for rebellion.
Exactly. Fueled massive peasant unrest, uprisings all over. Set the stage for new leaders, notably Li Yuan and his son Li Shimin, who'd lead the rebellion that finally overthrew the Sui.
And that brings us to the Tang dynasty, often called one of the greatest eras in Chinese history.
Truly a golden age. Remarkable stability, huge population growth, incredible advances in science, tech, arts, literature. Its cultural influence was massive. Chinatowns in the West, sometimes still called Tang People's Street, right? Linking back to the Tang.
Amazing, but the start, even within the ruling family, was rough.
Li Yuan became the first Tang emperor, but his son, Li Shimen, brilliant general, key figure in the rebellion, was locked in this fierce rivalry with his older brothers, especially the crown prince, Li Jiansheng.
And this rivalry ends dramatically, violently at the Shenu Gate.
Li Shimen got word his brothers were plotting against him. He acted decisively, ambushed them at the Shenwu Gate just outside the palace.
He killed his own brother.
Personally killed Li Jiansheng with an arrow. His associate killed the other brother, Li Yuanji. Ruthless move. Secured his path to the throne.
Wow, fratricide. The sources say the male heirs of his brothers were killed too, right? To eliminate future rivals.
Yes. Li Shimin then becomes Emperor Taizong.
And his reign is seen as a peak of Tang rule.
Widely considered so. Taizong was known for being a skilled administrator, but also for being willing to listen to criticism, even from officials who'd served his dead brothers.
That takes some confidence.
It does. He focused on domestic stability first, building prosperity before looking outwards. And he achieved this unique status first ruler to be both Chinese emperor and Khan of Heaven, after defeating the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, unified large parts of Central Asia.
How did he manage that Khan title?
Strategic approach. Mix of military force, smart diplomacy. There's that interesting detail about him agreeing to a duel with the Turkic Khagan.
Knowing the Khagan's bows wouldn't work well in the reign.
Possibly exploiting that knowledge, yeah. Showed his confidence. Ultimately, the Khagans surrendered without the duel, impressed by Taizong's position.
So under his stable, skilled rule, the Tang Golden Age really takes off.
Absolutely. Domestic stability allowed huge expansion. Cities like Changwon became these incredible cosmopolitan centers. Largest, most populated cities in the world then, maybe 2 million people.
Wow.
Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism all flourished. Influenced arts, culture, life.
But even golden ages eventually decline.
Yeah. Later emperors, like Xuanzong in his later years, power weakened, corruption grow. Appointing non-Chinese generals to powerful military posts like An Lushan turned out to be a huge mistake.
Leading to the devastating An Lushan rebellion.
Led by An Lushan, yeah. General Sogdian and Turkic background, started in 755 AD. Some sources describe it as possibly the deadliest war in human history.
And Lushan declared his own dynasty, attacked the Tang capitals.
Launched this devastating assault. The brutality described in the sources is just stark.
The siege of Suiyang, defenders forced into cannibalism.
Horrific accounts, yeah. The city was starved out. The war involved massive armies, intense sieges across the empire.
What was the rebellion's ultimate impact?
Staggering death toll. Maybe 20% of the empire's population wiped out, cities destroyed, economy crippled. Critically, the central Tang government was permanently weakened.
Even though they eventually put down the rebellion.
Yeah, they eventually suppressed it, but the empire never got back to its former strength. It was the undeniable end of the Golden Age.
So the Tang Empire kind of limped on through the 9th century after that, losing territory, central control.
It was increasingly unstable. Powerful regional governors, rising banditry, more peasant rebellions like the one led by Huang Chao, just kept weakening the state.
And yet, despite this decline, a world-changing invention pops up.
Gunpowder, around 850 AD, accidentally invented by Taoist alchemists looking for an elixir of immortality.
Trying to live forever, and they invent something explosive instead.
The irony, right? Mixing saltpeter, charcoal, sulfur, got unexpected results.
One of China's 4 great inventions.
Along with paper, printing, the compass, wasn't immediately used widely as a weapon, but its discovery shows the scientific activity happening, even during decline. Couldn't save the Tang, though.
No. The Tang finally collapsed, leading into a period known for just extreme instability.
The 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, 907 to 960 AD. Name says it all, really fragmented. Dynasties in the north rose and fell incredibly fast. Various kingdoms held power in the south. Notoriously messy, unstable time.
And some early rulers were depicted as particularly cruel even for that era.
Yeah, figures like Zhu Wen, first emperor of the later Liang, disturbing details in your sources, accused of being a sexual predator, assaulting wives of his own sons, officers.
He's constant turmoil until a new power emerges to unify things again.
A cycle of fragmentation, short-lived regimes, until Zhao Guangyin. He was a military inspector for one of the northern dynasties, seized power in a coup in 960 AD, unified most of China under the Song dynasty.
The Song dynasty, often celebrated for its culture, sophistication, incredible innovation.
Yes, divided into northern and southern periods. Emperor Taizu, that's Zhao Guangyin, he consciously shifted focus away from the military towards scholarly pursuits. Revamped the civil service exams, really emphasized literary knowledge, Neo-Confucian principles. Confucianism saw a big resurgence.
But this focus on civilian control came at the expense of military strength.
That's the key contrast with dynasties like the Tang or Qin, yeah. The Song were militarily weaker, constantly threatened by powerful northern groups, the Khitan Liao, later the Jurchen Jin.
And the Jin eventually conquered the northern Song capital, Kaifeng.
They did. In 1127, a major cultural center, big blow.
Forced the Song court to flee south.
To Hangzhou, which marks the start of the Southern Song period. And despite losing the north, this was a remarkably prosperous time.
Really? How so?
Agriculture thrived, partly because farmers got more secure land rights, booming rice production. Economy grew dramatically, trade was vibrant, population exploded.
And they were incredibly innovative during the Southern Song period.
Absolutely a high point for tech. First government in the world to issue paper money on a large scale. Managed a complex paper currency system.
Wow.
Perfected the magnetic compass, revolutionized navigation, and made significant military use of gunpowder. Bombs launched from catapults, fire arrows, even had these paddle wheel ships with gunpowder weapons. Let them defeat the Jin Navy, even when outnumbered.
Did their northern rivals manage to copy these inventions?
Unfortunately for the Song, yeah. The Jin, others, they learned how to replicate Song innovations, often by capturing Song tradesmen, forcing them to share secrets.
With their precarious position in the South, did Southern Song scholars focus on preserving traditional culture?
Definitely. Strong emphasis on Neo-Confucian scholarship. Conscious effort to preserve, promote traditional Han Chinese culture against the northern barbarian rule. Arts flourished too, often depicting peaceful, harmonious scenes. Maybe a longing for stability.
But ultimately, their innovations, their culture, couldn't save them from the next big threat from the north.
The Mongols, under Genghis Khan. The storm was coming.
Genghis Khan, Temujin, one of history's most famous and feared conquerors.
His early life was tough. Born with a blood clot in his hand, seen as an omen. Father poisoned when he was young, family left vulnerable. Later, his wife Borte was captured. Questions about the paternity of their first son, Jochi, lingered after her return.
He unified the Mongol tribes through, well, brutal military leadership.
Fierce strategic leader, used psychological warfare brilliantly. Terrifying raids, systematic pillaging, taking women, often made places surrender just out of fear.
And he had that famous early rivalry with his blood brother, Jamuka.
Bond turned to bitter hatred. Clash to Dalandaljet, Jamuka won initially, but his cruelty afterwards, boiling 70 young men alive in cauldrons.
Horrifying.
So horrifying it repulsed his own followers. Many defected to Genghis, ultimately cemented Genghis's dominance.
He consolidated power on the Mongol steppe, then looked towards China.
First major target in the Chinese sphere was the Western Xia, a Tangut state strategically located, conquered them relatively easily.
Then turned on the Jin dynasty in the north.
Mongol cavalry breached the Great Wall in 1211, devastated Jin territory. Eventually captured their capital, Zhongdu, modern Beijing, after a long siege.
Genghis Khan died in 1227. The statistics around his campaigns are just staggering.
Chilling. Estimates suggest he and his armies killed maybe 40 million people across Asia, more than Hitler and Stalin combined, some sources claim.
40 million.
And due to his conquests, taking women, genetic studies estimate something like 1 in 200 men alive today are direct descendants.
Incredible numbers, destruction and lineage. But the Mongol conquest of China didn't end with him.
No, his successor, Ogedai Khan, kept it going, and in a move that proved disastrously short-sighted.
The Southern Song allied with the Mongols.
To defeat the Jin, thinking they were getting rid of an old enemy, didn't realize they were just clearing the path for the Mongols to conquer them next.
Which was eventually completed by Kublai Khan,
Genghis's grandson. After winning a power struggle within the Mongol Empire, Kublai focused on the Southern Song, completed the conquest in 1279, established the Yuan dynasty, became the first non-native ruler of all China.
established his capital in Kanbali, modern Beijing.
He did. Kublai was actually a capable ruler in many ways, used innovative military tactics, built a powerful navy for southern China's waterways. Though his attempts to expand, further invading Japan, Vietnam mostly failed.
The Yuan dynasty is also known for that strict social hierarchy, right?
Yes, a rigid four-tiered caste system, based purely on ethnicity to keep Mongols on top.
Mongols first, then other Central Asians.
Right. Persians, Arabs, then northern Chinese. And the newly conquered southern Chinese were at the very bottom. Different legal rights, restrictions for each group. Ethnic Chinese couldn't own weapons, dogs, even eagles sometimes.
Despite this discrimination, was the Yuan period prosperous in other ways?
Ironically, yeah. Mongol rule brought stability, which boosted trade along the Silk Road, now secure across its whole vast length. Cities flourished. Kublai patronized Buddhism. Public works like the Grand Canal were restored, improved.
Marco Polo was there during Kublai's reign.
Famously spent 17 years in China, was just astonished by the sophistication paper money, coal for fuel, efficient postal systems, stuff Europe wouldn't see for ages.
But the Yuan dynasty eventually declined. What brought it down?
Usual suspects: corruption, infighting among Mongol leaders, costly failed wars. But a devastating blow was the Black Plague.
The same plague that hit Europe.
Yes. It originated in the Mongol Empire, Central Asia, maybe Crimea, spread rapidly eastward along the Silk Road through China years before it reached Europe.
Had a huge impact there first.
Catastrophic. Killed an estimated 13 million in China between 1331 and 1334 alone.
Devastating. And this chaos, hardship, led to rebellion.
Exactly. Plague, famine, floods from neglected infrastructure fueled massive discontent, culminated in the Red Turban Rebellion, led by Zhu Yuanzhang.
A former Buddhist monk from a peasant family.
Right. They capitalized on the hardship, successfully overthrew the weakened Yuan dynasty in 1368.
And Zhu Yuanzhang, the former peasant and monk, becomes the Hongwu emperor, founds the Ming dynasty.
Yep. Establishes the Ming. Grew into one of the most powerful empires in the world. Hongwu Emperor consolidated power ruthlessly, built a massive army, used gunpowder tech, effectively firearms, cannon batteries to fight off threats like the Mongols.
And this era saw a really conscious revival of traditional Han Chinese culture.
A key feature of the Ming, definitely. Rejected Mongol customs, banned Mongol names, clothes. Neo-Confucianism re-emphasized as state ideology. The merit-based civil service exams fully reinstated, strengthened, became the path to getting ahead.
Arts and literature flourished.
Big time. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the famous novel written during the Ming.
And public works focused on helping ordinary people.
Hongwu, coming from a peasant background, understood farming, started vast irrigation projects, dike repairs, improved conditions, boosted crop yields, economy thrived, trade expanded, population grew massively.
But the Hongwu emperor also had this really dark, paranoid side.
Deeply suspicious of anyone who might challenge him. instituted a brutal legal code. Terrifying punishments: lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts, flaying.
Flaying, skinning people alive.
Yes, ordered purges, massacres, to eliminate perceived threats. Created this atmosphere of fear in the court. Government.
The emphasis on strengthening borders also continued under the Ming, the Great Wall.
Yes, particularly under later emperors like Hongzhi. Poured resources into repairing, expanding, fortifying the Great Wall. Much of what tourists see today is Ming Dynasty work, a massive effort to create a strong defense against the north.
Despite the initial strength, prosperity, the later Ming emperors declined.
Yeah, power often fell to corrupt eunuchs, officials. Later emperors became detached, self-serving, administrative rot set in. Combine that with economic problems, climate change hitting agriculture, rising peasant rebellions, signaled the loss of the mandate of heaven again.
The final Ming emperor, Chongzhen, committed suicide.
In 1644, yeah, as rebel armies were marching on Beijing.
And that opens the door for the Manchu conquest, the Qing dynasty, China's second non-native dynasty.
The Manchu, from northeast of the wall, capitalized on the Ming collapse. Seized Beijing in 1644, established the Qing. To assert authority, they imposed the Q hairstyle, that shaved forehead, long braid on all Han Chinese men, symbol of submission, and made sure Manchus dominated the government.
But the early Qing emperors were actually quite capable rulers.
The Kangxi Emperor, especially, incredibly long reign, 61 years, influential, leaned on Neo-Confucianism for governing, but was also open to multiculturalism, famously allowed Jesuit missionaries at court.
They brought European science, tech, helped spread Catholicism.
Yep. Kangxi undertook major public works too, repaired the Grand Canal, improved river management, widely seen as one of China's most effective emperors.
And prosperity continued into the 18th century, under Yongzheng Qianlong.
Often seen as the high point of king power. Prosperity. Huge population, vast empire. But the 19th century brought a major shift, increasing pressure from Western powers, especially Britain.
Looking for more trade access, for silk, tea, porcelain.
Exactly. But the king court was deeply wary of foreigners, feared destabilization, cultural erosion, maintained this highly restrictive trade system, the Canton system.
Which limited where and how foreigners could trade.
Confined them to specific areas in Canton, Guangzhou. Could only trade with certain Chinese merchants, the Kuhong. Strict rules, no families, couldn't stay over winter, couldn't move freely. Europeans found it increasingly frustrating.
And the British found a commodity to break through all this: opium.
The British East India Company grew it in India, smuggled it illegally into China, vast quantities.
Created a massive trade imbalance, drained China's silver.
Hugely, and led to devastating opium addiction across Chinese society, despite the emperors repeatedly banning the trade.
The Qing government tried to crack down. Commissioner Lin Zexu
Made determined efforts, sent that famous letter to Queen Victoria appealing to her morality. Ignored.
So he took direct action.
Arrested dealers, users, famously confiscated and destroyed massive amounts of opium, like 2.4 million pounds in 1839.
Which really escalated tensions with Britain.
Especially after British sailors killed a Chinese villager and the British superintendent refused to hand him over for Chinese justice. Citing extraterritoriality, Lin Zexu cut off supplies to the British community. Led to clashes, outbreak of the First Opium War.
And British naval tech was just superior.
Vastly. Qing Navy was outdated, no match. Continuous defeats for China. Lin was dismissed. War ended with the humiliating Treaty of Nanjing in 1842.
Often called the first of the unequal treaties.
A defining moment. Start of China's century of humiliation. Forced China to pay Britain huge amounts, cede Hong Kong Island, open 5 treaty ports to unrestricted trade, abolish the Kuhong monopoly.
And grant extraterritoriality to British citizens.
Meaning they were subject only to British law in China. Place them beyond King justice. Huge blow to sovereignty.
The war's aftermath, plus existing problems, fueled massive internal instability, leading to the Taiping Rebellion.
Arguably the bloodiest civil war in history. 20 to 30 million dead, maybe more.
Led by Hang Xiquan, failed scholar who believed he was Jesus' younger brother.
Exactly. After failing exams, having a breakdown, reading Christian tracts, he came to believe he was sent by God to create a heavenly kingdom on earth.
Founded the God-worshipping society. Strong anti-king message.
Attracted millions of followers, peasants suffering poverty, famine, discontent with king rule, the Opium War fallout, declared the heavenly kingdom of transcendent peace, launched a massive rebellion.
Immense scale, incredible brutality.
Captured Nanjing, made it their capital, Tianjin. Tried to implement this radical social program mix of distorted Christian, traditional Chinese ideas, Rigid rules, harsh punishments, banned opium, alcohol, sex.
Did Western powers support them, given the Christian angle?
Some initial interest, especially in America, but
Yeah.
ultimately Britain, France sided with the king. Hong's claims were seen as blasphemous, and the Taiping attacked treaty ports, disrupted trade. That was unacceptable.
And the rebellion had brutal internal conflicts, too.
The Tianjin Incident, 1856. Horrifying. Yang Shuqing, the king of the East, got too powerful, claimed to speak for God. Hong Jiquan felt threatened, ordered a purge. Massacre killed over 27,000 Taiping civilians.
While this is raging, Western powers wanted more concessions from the king.
Weren't happy with the Treaty of Nanjing. Wanted full opium legalization, more access. Incidents like the king arresting the crew of the British ship Arrow gave them a pretext.
Leading to the Second Opium War?
Britain, later joined by France. France used the execution of a missionary, Auguste Chapdelaine, as their excuse. Horrific death described in some sources, beaten, mutilated, left in a cage. They launched a joint campaign against the king.
Being defeated again, military superiority confirmed.
Suffered heavy losses.
Yeah.
Anglo-French forces marched on Beijing. As punishment, the British infamously burned the emperor's incredible summer palace to the ground. Took 3 days.
The resulting treaties. Even worse than Nanjing.
Treaty of Tianjin, Convention of Beijing. Opened more ports, allowed foreign legations in Beijing. Foreigners could travel, do missionary work inland.
And crucially, legalized opium.
Yes. Legalized the trade that had crippled society, drained wealth. Your sources call it the final blow to the imperial king system.
The king eventually suppressed the Taiping Rebellion, but at huge cost, often with foreign help.
Collaborated with Western powers, empowered regional Chinese armies like Zhang Guiafan's, adopted equally brutal tactics, burning towns, executing civilians. Death toll from war, famine, plague was catastrophic.
Conditions in besieged cities were horrific on both sides.
Reports mention cannibalism, yeah, out of desperation. Hong Xiuquan himself died, reportedly food poisoning after telling followers to eat weeds they thought were divine manna. After the defeat, his body was dug up, beheaded, cremated, ashes blasted from a cannon to deny him a resting place.
So after the Opium Wars, the Taiping Rebellion, Qing dynasty severely weakened, facing more challenges.
Corruption still rampant, leadership weak, and a newly modernized Japan emerged as a regional power.
Leading to another devastating conflict, the First Sino-Japanese War.
1894-95. Japan's modern military just crushed the king's disorganized forces, even though King had bought modern gear. Humiliating defeat for China.
Treaty of Shimonoseki.
Forced China to cede Taiwan, Pescadores Islands. Recognize Korea's independence, ending that traditional tributary link. Pay a massive indemnity. Another brutal addition to the century of humiliation.
More rebellions, like the Boxer Rebellion, showed the king had lost the people's faith.
Peasant uprisings common. Meanwhile, reformist revolutionary movements gained ground. Key figure, Dr. Sun Yat-sen.
His Revolutionary Alliance aimed to overthrow the dynasty, establish a republic.
Right. Focused on radicalizing soldiers within the king's own modernized new army.
Culminated in the Wushang Uprising in 1911.
Radicalized soldiers in Wuchang mutinied, seized the city, declared a republic, sparked similar uprisings elsewhere, accelerated the collapse. Sun Yat-sen was actually abroad lobbying when it kicked off.
The powerful King General Yuan Shikai was sent to crush the rebellion.
Initially. But Yuan saw his chance. Negotiated with both sides, King Court, revolutionaries. Yep. In 1912, convinced the Empress Dowager to agree to the abdication of the child Emperor Pui, formally ending thousands of years of dynastic rule.
So the king are gone, millennia of imperial rule over, but the transition to a republic, not smooth at all.
Far from it. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was briefly provisional president, but handed it over to Yuan Shikai, who had the military clout. Part of the deal.
But Yuan got ambitious, tried to become emperor himself.
Yes, 1915-16, declared himself emperor, met huge opposition, failed before he died in 1916. His death left this massive power vacuum.
Feeding straight into the chaotic warlord era.
1916 to 1928. China just fragmented, controlled by regional warlords with their own armies, ignoring any central authority, constant fighting between them.
Two major political forces emerged during this time. The Kuomintang, KMT.
Led by Sun Yat-sen initially, then Chiang Kai-shek, aiming to reunify the country.
And the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, founded in 1921.
Influenced by the May 4th movement's intellectual energy, Marxism-Leninism, the Russian Revolution.
They initially allied against the warlords, but it didn't last.
Nope. As Chiang Kai-shek led the KMT's northern expedition to reunify China, he came to see the growing CCP as a threat. Sparked the Chinese Civil War. 1927, KMT launched a brutal purge of communists, leftists in Shanghai, other cities. Thousands killed.
The Civil War saw different strategies emerge.
Mao Zedong became a key CCP leader, argued against the focus on urban workers, said the real revolutionary force was the rural peasantry. Mobilizing them became crucial.
The Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931, and expanding later, forced a temporary halt to the Civil War.
A precarious Second United Front formed in 1937 to fight Japan. But tensions were still high. KMT even continued encirclement campaigns against CCP areas, used German advisors' scorched earth tactics.
This led to one of the most famous episodes, the Long March.
A strategic retreat by the CCP Red Army, from their southern base to a new one up north. Grueling trek, 10,000 kilometers. Mountains, rivers, hostile territory, KMT attacks.
Huge loss.
Massive. Started with maybe 90,000 soldiers in 1934. Only about 10% finished in 1935. But those who survived, hardened ideological core.
Then, 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War officially begins. Full-scale invasion.
Lasted till 1945. Site of just immense suffering, atrocities. Japanese military was technologically superior, brutally disciplined, quickly seized major cities, transport routes.
The rape of Nanjing, a particularly horrific example.
Chiang Kai-shek withdrew official troops, left mostly untrained defenders. Japanese forces captured the city. 6 weeks of widespread massacre, mass rape, looting, destruction. Estimates around 200,000 civilians killed.
There was a safety zone organized by Westerners.
Yeah, provided refuge for about 250,000. Other battles, like Wuhan, also saw hundreds of thousands of casualties.
Chinese forces, KMT, and CCP guerrillas managed to tie down Japanese troops, though.
Across the vast country, yeah. Guerrilla tactics, enduring brutal warfare. Bogged down the Japanese advance, held out until Japan surrendered at the end of WWII in 1945.
But peace in China didn't last long.
Civil war between KMT and CCP resumed almost immediately. But this time, the dynamics had shifted.
How so?
CCP's People's Liberation Army had grown stronger, gained support in the countryside, controlled valuable resources in the north.
Leading to a different outcome this time.
CCP forces were better disciplined, motivated, had popular rural support. Steadily gained ground against the KMT, whose leadership suffered from corruption, low morale. By 1949, KMT forces defeated, retreated to Taiwan.
And this victory led to the founding of the People's Republic of China.
October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong declaring its establishment in Beijing.
Mao Zedong, initially popular, right, for reunifying China after decades of war, invasion, civil strife.
Seen as a national hero, stood up to foreign powers, finally brought central rule back. One of his first big policies, land reform movement, redistributing land from landlords to peasants, popular with the poor, but violent. Over 1 million landlords executed, accused of exploitation, wiped out the old rural elite, capitalist remnants.
But some later policies were disastrous.
The Great Leap Forward, 1958-62. Catastrophic attempt at rapid industrialization, modernization through collectivization.
Peasants forced into communes, agriculture neglected for unrealistic industry goals, like backyard steel furnaces.
Exactly. Poor planning, exaggerated production reports led directly to the Great Chinese Famine.
And the scale of that famine was just horrific.
One of the deadliest in human history. Tens of millions died, estimates vary, 30, 45 million maybe. Sources even mention reports of cannibalism out of sheer desperation.
The disaster forced Mao to step back temporarily.
From state chairmanship, yeah. But he came back, launching the Cultural Revolution.
1966. Aimed at destroying bourgeois elements, securing his own power.
Ostensibly. Unleashed this period of intense chaos, political purging.
Mobilizing student groups, the Red Guards.
Yeah, Mao galvanized young students into these paramilitary Red Guards, encouraged them to attack bourgeois infiltrators, symbols of old culture.
Led to brutal massacres. Red August in Beijing.
Estimates suggest 10,000 killed there alone. Students publicly humiliated, tortured, killed teachers, intellectuals, cultural sites destroyed. Country descended into near anarchy.
Before Mao used the army to restore order.
Potentially, yeah. Dismiss the Red Guards.
The death toll for the Cultural Revolution itself is also huge.
Estimates range 500,000 up to 2 million directly killed. Many more persecuted, imprisoned, displaced. A truly devastating period.
Looking back over Mao's entire rule, the total deaths attributed to his policies.
Sobering numbers. By his death in 1976, estimates range from 40 to 80 million. From starvation, overwork, executions during purges, land reform.
After Mao died, leadership transitioned to Deng Xiaoping.
Deng gradually emerged as the paramount leader. Critically assessed Mao's policies, initiated major economic reforms moving towards a market-driven system, dramatically boosted China's trade, foreign investment, GDP. transformed its global economic position.
And our sources wrap up this historical narrative around 1989.
Yeah, ending with those growing calls for political economic reform among university students, partly triggered by the death of Hu Yaobang, a popular reformer, led to large-scale demonstrations, famously in Tiananmen Square. Students presented demands for more freedom, less corruption, ultimately met with a military crackdown.
Wow, okay. That was an absolutely immense deep dive. Thousands of years, incredible cycles of rise and fall, unity, fragmentation,
Yeah, found philosophies, world-changing inventions.
devastating conflicts, dramatic social, political change. It's just staggering in scope.
It really is a narrative unlike any other. And remember, this journey was guided purely by the specific sources you provided. It shows how much detail, how much insight you can get even from a curated set of materials covering such a vast time.
What stands out to you? Any enduring patterns through all this incredible history?
It's fascinating how certain tensions just keep reappearing, isn't it? That constant struggle, that balance between centralized power, imperial or state, and regional control, local autonomy.
Yeah, you see that again and again.
The recurring impact of external threats versus internal rebellion on state stability. The search for a just, orderly society. And who gets to define that? Who holds the right to rule? Is it divine decree, bloodline, merit, revolution?
These aren't just historical footnotes.
Not at all. They're dynamics that have shaped China for millennia.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe a question for you, the listener, to consider. After hearing about these thousands of years, the mandate of heaven won and lost, empires rising and falling, philosophies, rebellions shaping everything, what patterns do you see that feel most relevant for understanding the forces shaping China today? Thank you for providing the sources that made this deep dive possible.
And thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through history.